Morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Viewpoint on 96.3 FM. Before we get to our three guests we have with us today, in Viewpoint fashion, quick shout out to everybody. Holidays around the corner, and our blood donors, donations do run lower this time, it seems like. So there is a blood drive today going on in Hartsburg-Emden at the high school. I shouldn't say Hartsburg-Emden, so at the high school, at the Hartem High School there. And then if you can't make that today, Lincoln Memorial Hospital is hosting a community blood drive on Monday, November 20th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the Steinfort conference rooms there. Again, all blood types are needed, folks, and donors will get their choice of a gift card or Impact for Life rewards to be used for their limited edition sweatshirts. So anyway, circling over to our three wonderful guests today, we have in the studio joining us from the Logan County Action Group. We have Bobby Jackson, and we have Susan Adams and George Minkin. So thank you so much for making it up here to the station. Greatly appreciate it. We do invite listeners to call in with any questions or concerns. That'd be 217-648-5510. We have a lot of people who, when we do get off the radio, say, why didn't you ask that question? And so we encourage you to ask. We can't think of all the questions. But last night, well, first of all, the Logan County Action Group, how was that formed? How did that come about? What's the history behind that group?
Well, first of all, I'll start off saying we're pretty young, right? It's sort of been organic, I think you described. What happened was my wife and I got a letter from the Top Hat wind farm that came into our area. So we got curious about it, began to talk to our neighbors. That led to digging in a little bit more about the details of wind farms and their effect on the community, good and bad. And then that led to us discovering that our county board had misplaced like $40 million worth of agreements for the 4 wind farms we have in production today. And just a note, I haven't seen those still a year later. Mm-hmm. We're waiting to get those in hand. But that led to some concerns around county board management, communication, transparency to the community, and that sort of thing. So we had 2 or 3 couples that decided, and the help of George and some others, decided to just educate us and educate our team on various things in terms of like parliamentary procedures and operations of the government and that sort of thing. And it just kind of just evolved. And how the name formed, I'll keep this brief, sentiment based on thinking, well, maybe the folks in Logan County should know about these decommissioning agreements that the board is struggling to find. So I wanted to put a video together to share that, and then I didn't have a name to use, so I just came up with something off the top of my head, and it kind of stuck. So.
Well, it's wonderful, and if folks don't realize, you guys, like you said, do have a Facebook page or group, whatever you want to call that. I apologize if I misspoke that. but it is the Logan County Action Group, and that is very informative. I want to say kudos to you because it seems very professionally ran, very educational, and you guys have facts, drawings, whatever, and I want to say kudos to you guys. That is wonderful. So it's a great resource, I want to say, for our county and for our citizens and for people in the surrounding counties too who do need to be educated. So last night I watched you guys televised, streamed, whatever terminology you want to use. You were at the Logan County zoning meeting last night. How did that go? What was your take on that from that meeting? How did you guys think that went?
I thought,
not to put you guys on the
we
spot.
thought, well, the agenda that was posted for the meeting indicated carbon sequestration was going to be on the agenda. And I think the county board just uses sequestration as a general term.
Okay.
It would be in regard to Wolf Carbon Solutions USA coming in and introducing themselves and talking about a pipeline at this point, not sequestration, but talking about pipeline. And it would have been interesting to hear their introduction and what they're looking at. But that didn't happen. I think Wolf notified Emily Davenport a little before the meeting that they weren't going to be able to make it. And apparently the county board had asked if they wanted to come to the working board meeting on Thursday, and they've indicated no to that as well.
So they're not going to be.
So they're not going to be here.
Showing up then.
Right. So the indication at this point is, I think they may be going out and working with landowners, is what I'm being told. Back in a few months ago, when we first came into the area, we were asking the townships to support a moratorium, do an opposition, some kind of a resolution against the CO2 pipeline and sequestration, and they wanted to hear from Wolf, and we managed to get that arranged, and we actually had 3 people from Wolf come in. It was open to the public, and questions could be asked between the townships, and could be answered then by Wolf itself. And then it was opened up for some questions from the audience. And that went well, but it's my understanding that others have asked Wolf to come in and do presentations, such as over in the Peoria or Pekin area, and they've declined so far.
And then, so a quick recap for our listeners. There's been 2 proposed pipelines for Illinois here, correct? One, the Wolf pipeline that is going to be affecting or is affecting or starting to affect Logan County and the northern part, and then the one that just pulled out was Sangamon County, correct?
Right. That was
And
Navigator.
Okay, yeah.
And it was called, these pipelines have names. The Navigator one was called Heartland Greenways. I don't know that the Wolf one has a name yet that I'm aware of.
Now the Wolf pipeline, it's the one, forgive me if I misspeak, it's going to be starting there at the Quad Cities, correct?
Iowa City, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right there at the Quad Cities, and then it's going supposedly to ADM,
Correct.
in Decatur then, okay.
Because ADM has an ethanol plant in Iowa City, Iowa City. And so they're going to be, since ADM is already sequestering in Decatur, they're wanting to bring more down and sequester at that same location.
Okay, so they want to bring that through then. So Wolf, you said, is already contacting landowners. How are they going about doing that? What have you guys seen or witnessed or heard of how they're contacting landowners?
Well, they're sending 2 kinds of letters out, in my experience. They're sending one out that's essentially telling you that you're going to be within a half mile of where the proposed route, which is actually a 1 mile wide route.
Wow.
And the second letter they're sending out is to the notify the landowners that their property is going to be part of what the pipeline goes through. Now, I've got both letters, and I've not returned or made any phone calls or anything. The gentleman that I lease farms my ground didn't respond to the letters, didn't respond to the calls to him, and they finally knocked on his door.
Really?
And he told them he would not lease or sell, and he did not want to be asked again. But with a 1 mile wide proposed corridor, they could only take 200 feet by state law. So what they did was put the 1 mile in so that if one landowner refused, they could jump it over to get it. But if you're within, according to Wolf, a half mile of an eruption or a breakage or whatever, you're considered in a danger zone of some type. Technically, depending on where you're at, it could kill you. So in Wolf's case, that also includes a less than half mile distance from the grade school.
The grade school there in
In
Atlanta. Okay.
Wolf was asked at the meeting they had in Atlanta what the procedure is going to be. Are they going to have alarms out, or are they going to have notices or whatever? Because Navigator had stated they'd have sensors placed along the route. Wolf's response was, if it happens, they'll notify the fire department, and everybody should just shelter in place.
Okay.
Well, essentially, what if you want me to be blunt, what that
Yes.
means is it'll be easier to find the bodies.
Yeah.
Because if it blows, depending on the wind direction, you're either going to run into it or you're going to run out of it. And with no methodology of knowing, I mean, by the time it blows, and let's say they send the siren off in Atlanta, by that time it's too late. It's already out, it's moving.
You've already got a plume that's already started. And,
Right.
Yeah.
And depending on the distance between the shutoffs, it could be 7 miles to 21 miles of pipe pressurized at 2,500 PSI. That's a lot of CO2 that's going to empty if both valves shut. And they can't slam shut, they have to go through slow. If they slam, they can cause a further eruption
Further eruption.
somewhere else. So, and I got off of your question, but
No,
yes.
no, you're fine. No, you're doing great. No.
Yes,
no.
they have sent letters and done in person. No, they haven't come to me in person, but I'm next to, it won't matter. The guy that's refused them, they'd have to go through his before they could get to mine. So I don't know anybody that's signed personally, but I live on the other end of town from Sioux. So there are people that rumors have signed with them for it.
Right. And I know, Susan, you and I were talking that, tell us a brief kind of what happened, our listeners, with the one person giving misinformation about, if you don't sign, I'm going to lose my job.
No.
So,
Their
their tactics need to be known.
This is in regard to Wolf coming around, and I haven't seen any contracts, but they have come around, and they've come around with applications. The last form they came around with, they wanted permission to come onto your property to do surveying, and the surveying could be everything from surveying to boring holes in your property to a number of other things. And one of the land agents left a permission to survey form with a friend, and the land agent said, I need, well, she left it with the lady's son, and the land agent told the son, I need to have your mother sign this, or I will lose my job. So she's equating her job to potentially people losing their lives. And I don't think, when I have visited with the land agent in the past, I don't think she understands CO2, what can happen, how fast it can asphyxiate someone. So there's a number of things there.
So the tactics are not credible or
I was surprised at how uninformed the land agents were. And I didn't know if that was on purpose or just an oversight.
Right. Is there any federal guidelines for CO2 pipelines? Or if there is, are they very good? Does the federal government need to improve those guidelines for 2024?
Okay, there's a lot of gaps, a lot of unregulated. Currently, after the CO2 pipeline eruption in Satartia, Mississippi in 2020, PHMSA, which is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration under the Department of Transportation, they said those CO2 pipelines that were used for carrying fracking material, we need to reassess if we're going to start looking at doing CO2 injection. Fracking wells are only a class 2, CO2 injection wells are a class 6. So about a year and a half ago, PHMSA put out some requests for proposals from the science community to do some study on some of this. Currently, PHMSA does regulate CO2 that's 90% pure if it's in the supercritical state, which means it has to be at least 88 degrees Fahrenheit and at least under 1,070 pounds PSI. Now, all this CO2 will be probably transported somewhere between 17 and 2,100 pounds PSI. But the problem is, once the CO2 goes into the pipeline, the ground will lower the temperature. So once it drops below 88 degrees, it's no longer in supercritical phase or form. It then drops down into what's called dense phase. No one regulates CO2 that's 90% pure in a dense phase form. So if there's an issue, eruption, leak, who's responsible? And that's some of the questions and issues that need to be looked at. And then you get into if there's eruptions or leaks. When you see dispersion happening, PHMSA knows that they need to have better dispersion modeling required to be used, that some of those dispersion models need to be made available for setbacks. Because right now, the companies want to run pipelines within 200 feet of a home, and they object if you want a setback of a half mile, and yet no one's wanting to provide any information on dispersion. So there's just a lot of issues that still have to be resolved. Who regulates CO2 that goes in and the purity? A lot of standards. Is it really injected? Is it really sequestered? Some of that kind of thing.
Now, I know we were talking earlier before we went on the air that, so of course we got the pipeline, and then you've mentioned sequestrian. So that's another project, correct?
Correct.
For Logan County that is possibly proposed, or is proposed, not here yet, but it is being proposed for Logan County. Tell our listeners about sequestrian and how that is different from just a straight pipeline.
Right.
So,
and when you start talking about CO2, you have three facets of it. You have the pipeline, you have the sequestration, which is storage into pore space, and then you have the injection wells. So if you're at all familiar with these gas storage fields that are around us, they inject natural gas down into the ground to store it until it's needed to be piped elsewhere in the winter. That gas is stored in the Mount Simon Formation. Well, it's being proposed, natural gas is stored in the top third of the formation. What's wanting to be done with the CO2 is it would be stored in the bottom third of that formation. So that just kind of gives you an idea of where some of this is being placed. And Navigator came in probably 2021 or so, and started signing up people for sequestration, they wanted their pore space under their ground from about 200 feet above the Eau Claire Shale. The Eau Claire Shale is what's supposed to be a cap to the Mount Simon and supposed to keep the CO2 from migrating up. And they were wanting to lease or buy pore space from the landowners in the Logan, McLean, Tazewell area. And then they're looking at putting in approximately at least 2, maybe 3 injection wells.
And then keeping it here forever. So basically, it's a dump site, because you cannot,
Yes.
they're not going to reuse the CO2. It's just, we're going to be sitting on CO2 garbage, in layman's terms, correct?
Well,
So,
Yes, although technically it could be, CO2 could be pulled out
okay,
and used for fracking.
okay. But are they wanting to do that, or are they just?
Well, we don't know. We
Right.
don't know
Those are
on some of this
questions.
stuff.
Uh-huh.
And if you're getting credit for sequestering, then if you turn around and pull this out and use it for fracking and create more CO2, then what's the benefit?
Right, right. And then we're sitting on top of a huge aquifer.
Yes.
And so have they addressed those issues of possible leakage into the aquifer or not? I mean, what have they, have they, projected, or what's out there? What are they saying of how they can, possibly protect the aquifer?
Well, the individuals, the people with Navigator seem to feel that this is safe. All the way the pipes are put in, encased in cement and several layers, that all of this is fine. But we do know that once you start these projects, and the CO2 project, they're projecting 30 years of injection, and then 100 years after that of monitoring. So you're talking a minimum of 130 years. And that means maintenance over that time, because if you stop injecting after 30 years, then you're going to have maintenance after that. Well, over in Fisher, Illinois, the gas storage field over there had one of their injection wells started leaking, and that field was put in, I believe, in the mid-50s. And so just because of poor maintenance, one of the injection wells started leaking into the Muhammad Aquifer. People could turn their water on in their house and light their water because there was that much natural gas in the water. Now, that was about 5 years ago. The issue's come to light. It's been looked at. A plan's been put in place. I think there's money there, but it's not been administered and resolved. So this stuff doesn't happen quickly. So once you contaminate a water source, trying to undo it is a really tough thing.
Mm-hmm. I know we briefly touched on, what does it do for farmers that are listening if there is, a possible leakage?
Right.
They need to be fully aware of what could happen. Shed some light on that for our listeners.
And if CO2 leaks into water, some of what happens is you'll get some carbonic acid, and that is corrosive to metal. So if you have livestock or metal fittings in buildings and such, you can get faster erosion. Pipes, irrigation, you could have faster erosion. It can also alter the chemistry of the water. So it could change the pH. And we know that in the past, changing the pH will affect how effective, say, Roundup is or some of your other chemicals. We don't know all the aspects of what could change. And then once you inject CO2 into your Mount Simon Formation, which is, it's actually being injected into they call it a brine solution. It's a kind of a saltwater solution that's there. Your CO2 can start to pull other stuff out of the surrounding rock formation, such as chlorides or arsenic and other other minerals that are toxic, and these can migrate up into your aquifer if there's any leakage. And if there's any leakage into the aquifer, you can have the same thing.
Do you have any questions for them?
No, I'm just kind of taking it all in here, so.
So last night, I know McLean County zoning also had a meeting. Have you guys heard any reports as to how that meeting went there at McLean County or not?
I haven't for last night. It's the Zoning Board of Appeals that has been having these meetings, and I've actually gone up to a few of them to speak. They are trying to do some, what they did is, I think Navigator wanted some zoning regarding well setbacks from injection wells. And based on no information being provided to the zoning board or the county, we're wanting this done, and we're wanting it based on natural gas pipelines. And you really can't compare natural gas to CO2 because they function differently and different dynamics on them. So that's still an ongoing process of trying to define what kind of setbacks.
Has Peoria County, how are they reacting to this, to Wolf and to all these projects? Can you shed some light for our listeners? So our neighboring counties, how's Peoria handling it, all of this? And Tazewell County.
Yeah, I think Tazewell County, I believe, has done a
Moratorium.
They've done a moratorium.
Okay.
They have some active groups over there that have been pushing for that. Peoria had, the Park District, I believe, did a resolution opposing. And I don't know quite, but I think Peoria hasn't gotten there yet.
Okay.
And I know some of this goes through Pekin. It's interesting because the pipeline actually goes apparently within I believe a couple 100 feet of a prison over in that area, and it goes within maybe 50 feet or so of the Rankin, one of the Rankin School buildings over there.
Wow.
So it's
And it's going underneath the Illinois River,
and
too,
it's
on
going
top of that. I mean,
that'll be bored, and I'm not sure there's a lot of consistency as to how deep they're actually going to put this, because some of the information I've read, and these are the applications that Wolf and Navigator have made. In some locations, it seems like there'll be about 2.5 feet of dirt over the top. In others, there'll be 5 feet of dirt over the top.
so they're not going very far down then.
So it seems like they may be going 5 foot down, but then if you've got if they're going to be putting in a 19-inch interior diameter pipe, it's probably about a 20 or 21 outer diameter pipe. That doesn't leave you a lot of coverage. And as our equipment gets heavier,
Right.
you're going to have compaction, pressure on the pipes if they are too close to the surface. The other thing is, we know these the gas pipelines migrate up with time, and companies have actually come in Logan County to have to rebury. They dig up a pipeline, roll it out of the ditch, dig it deeper, and roll it back in and cover it.
And has, they're going to have to maintain this. And like you said, the maintenance of the gas pipeline or the gas
Yes.
storage there over Farmer City or that area you mentioned, or I apologize, I misspoke, that town. Or Mahomet, over
yeah.
at Mahomet. So who's going to be maintaining it, or if they're going to be able to keep it, the maintenance up on it like they're supposed to?
Right, and some of the people that I work with, they've been involved with some of the talks with the governor's office, and your CO2 companies have been there. The CO2 companies seem to want the state to take over after the 30 years and monitor it. The state doesn't really want to do that. It's your taxpayer dollars paying for the carbon credits. If the state takes it over, it's your taxpayer dollars paying for it.
So we're going to put it in, use it for 30 years, and then it's Illinois' baby that basically to babysit.
And none of that's been resolved, and that's been part of the issue. So, yeah.
has any of our local constituents said anything as to how they're feeling on this at all or not? Or has it gone to that level yet, of government level, from Springfield? Have they said anything?
There's been some legislation proposed, some from the companies and some from the opponents. I have visited with some of the legislators, and they may not think it's a good idea, but they're tending to back the current administration on what they're wanting to do. Although I'm wondering if that'll change, because the end of September, there was a White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. They did a recommendation on climate planning, preparedness, response, recovery, and impacts. And in it, they say their definition of clean energy is wind, solar, tidal, and geothermal power. Clean energy sources do not include fracked gas, carbon capture, biomass, biogas, incineration, or nuclear power. So they've just recently stated that clean sources don't include carbon capture. So it'll be interesting to see how fast this can get incorporated and what they do with it.
Okay. So if some people are thinking, CO2 is clean energy, it's
not.
It's not.
And once you start getting, the reason these companies are wanting to sequester from ethanol plants is the CO2 is clean. It's CO2 coming off of the fermentation process, so it's already 98% pure. If you start doing the CO2 from a power plant, cement plant, chemical plants, it's not pure and it has to be cleaned up, which takes an increase of power and it takes water. So if you don't have the water, you may have it today, you may not have it a month from now,
Right.
if you're going to be using a lot of water.
So depleting all of the water sources.
One solution creates a lot of other problems.
Right. The trickle-down domino effect. So, yeah. What other information do you want our listeners to know? Whether it be, from the fracking, from the CO2, is there anything you want to bring up to speed, about the windmills? This is to educate our listeners, it's, like you said, we call it, this is Viewpoint. So, what do you want to say, and let people know about?
Well, I think on the CO2 subject, if that's a good idea, what are the options, Susan? Could you share with them about what can Logan County citizen, the average citizen, do to help?
Or to stop it.
Help is a bad term, but
I think one of the things there's a number of things that if you're affected by the Wolf pipeline or the sequestration, if you haven't signed anything, don't sign anything. If you get an application from Wolf asking you for permission to survey, just simply write denied across it and send it back to them. If we don't sign things, if we don't cooperate, then it gives us a chance to work at stopping this from continuing to come in. That's kind of what happened with Navigator. Navigator going through Springfield and south only managed to get about 15% of the landowners to sign an agreement. So if you don't sign an agreement, that helps. And for sequestration, for a pipeline to start, the company has to actually go through the ICC first before the company can contact any landowners. With sequestration, that's not the case. The companies just come out and start contacting individuals and asking them to sign on. So
they're not very well.
They're not knowledgeable.
And they're not being regulated. Basically, it sounds kind of like
Right.
We have a caller.
We do.
Oh, wonderful. So you'll have to put on headphones. Got an extra headphone. Just a second, caller. We will get you on.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, caller.
Okay, if you don't cooperate, can't they force you to comply?
He said if they don't cooperate, the landowners,
If
correct?
if I own some ground, and if they want to come through, and I say no, and then you down the road farther in a year or two, can they force you to comply?
You would, or you want me to?
You can say.
You can go ahead, George.
They can't force you to comply. However, the state has given them eminent domain. If they pass, if the state licenses it, the ICC passes it under the statutes, they get eminent domain. And which point they just come in and take the ground.
But we haven't gotten there yet.
No.
Okay.
Now they still have to compensate you for the ground for that.
My basic question is that can they force you to, at the end of the road, can they force you to do that? And they can, which is not right.
Right. Yeah, potentially. There's no legislation on that. There's work being done that, at least for sequestration, legislation has not been written. And what's being looked at is, the last one that I saw was if 70% of the people in a sequestration area signed on, or 71%, then the company could go to DNR and ask to have the remaining area
Eminent domain.
amalgamated for CO2. And I don't know what process amalgamation is, or aggregation. Maybe it's aggregation. With pipeline, I don't know.
It's eminent domain with pipeline.
It's eminent domain with the pipeline, and I don't know that any guidelines have been set on that yet either.
Okay. Well, that was just my basic question. I wanted to know if I could be forced to comply if it would happen. But I was a farmer all my life, and if I worked the way the legislature did, I would have never got nothing done. So,
Yeah.
anyway, that's my question. They can basically force me to comply.
Yes, depending on legislation, that would be forthcoming.
Yeah, that'd be a long time ago, and I probably won't be here then. So, I thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for calling in. Appreciate it. Again, listeners, if you want to call in, it's 217-648-5510. We have Bobby Jackson with us, Susan Adams, George Mencken with the Logan County Action Group. Tell our listeners if they want to find out more information. Are you guys having any more meetings coming up at all or not? Or what's your next course of action? Because like I said, we just had the Logan County zoning meeting last night. So what are we facing? How do you keep moving forward with this?
Well, kind of as you can tell, it's an evolving story, right?
Right,
New information
right.
coming all the time. I think there's several groups that are pretty active, and oddly enough, they're probably on opposing sides of the climate change argument. But there are several groups that are active specifically in the CO2. For the sake of the Logan County Action Group, really what we're trying to do is educate. So we are planning to put together a video series to break apart what CO2 is in terms of its impact, its risk factors, sort of the money behind the story, and then what are the options for the community to respond. And we're putting that together now. It's probably going to come out over the next coming weeks. That's our plan anyway. To educate. And the other thing I would say is that work with your local officials. Sue had encouraged me just last night to work with our township to try to put a moratorium. Now, because of the state's guidelines and their involvement, it may be only, what's the word I'm going to look for? If they put a moratorium together, it may not be a legally binding
Right.
procedure, right? But
That or a resolution opposing,
right.
to let the county know where the townships stand.
Right. But it does send a signal that to the state legislators and others that the community doesn't want it, right? So
Right.
I think it's significant. I would encourage our Logan County Board to reconsider their position on CO2 sequestration, even if, and I think it was stated last night by one of the board members, we don't have any say-so in this. Yeah, maybe, but I'm not certain that that's 100% the case. The gentleman's a lawyer, so he probably knows the law side of it. But the flip side of that argument is even if their moratorium that they would place isn't binding, at least it sends a signal, right? So I think they could do that, and I think there's community behind them.
Has Logan County Board actually stated at all, come out and said we are against this or we are for this, or are we looking into this? Have they come out with an official statement yet?
Well, it's not directly that I've been involved with. I will say that I was involved in one committee meeting where the committee chair had turned to one of the board members and said we should negotiate with them early while we can still get some revenue benefit from it.
Really?
And I was disappointed in that statement because this isn't about the money. This is about safety. And without even knowing, I don't think, I don't speak for this person or any of the other board members, but unless you really know the risk factors associated with a project like this, you shouldn't be making statements like that. Right? That's just my opinion. They're there to protect us. And again, you got to think about the county board. Why is it in place? It's there to protect the citizens. They are a firewall between the community and decisions like this. And if they can't take their rightful place and protect the community, then they're delinquent on their responsibility. That's my
And they're elected officials representing the citizens of Logan County.
But can I expand on his
You
comment?
sure can. Please do so.
We've done a number of FOIAs, including emails from the elected officials. One of the things we found was that Navigator had offered $1.25 million to the county board for a number of years if the county board agreed to an unknown something with Navigator. And that came out in the emails correspondence of one of the board members. The board has never agreed, but an offer of that kind of money is, for whatever reason they were going to give it to them, is a little astounding. Now, Sangamon County, they did a similar, I don't know what the amount was. The state's attorney there encouraged that county board not to accept it. And he encouraged that on the basis that they weren't being specific about what actions they were going to require the county board to take or do. The other problem I see with it would be a significant conflict of interest at that point. Is the board working for the company or is the board working for the public?
County, right.
And the fact that's a legal action that these companies can take just astounds me. That
Has our state's attorney addressed that email then about Logan County getting that?
we don't know what he's advised to the board.
Okay.
I'm going to assume that he has and told them not to, but you've got at least one member of that board that is more concerned about the money than they are the safety aspect of it, which is also, you could tie that same interest into your wind farms and your solar farms because of the amount of income that comes off of those in tax dollars.
Let me add, the state of Illinois does not tax pipelines. Other states do. So all these companies, when they've been coming through other states, have had to pay a tax for the pipeline. When Navigator got to Illinois and found out we did not tax, then what Navigator decided to do was offer the county say $20,000 a mile per pipeline for the length of the pipeline in the county for 30 years. And that's what they were proposing and doing to try and get the counties to go along with them. Now, in Springfield, during one of the open public meetings with Navigator and the Sangamon County Board, the question was asked, okay, you're going to give the county $20,000 a mile for the pipeline. If the state decides to turn around and tax the pipeline, will you still continue to give that $20,000 to the county? And Navigator said no.
So my question to you is, back to the safety and questions, and I guess you can say here comes the insurance agent part of me out in this. Let's say they do come through and they do put the pipeline in. Let's say in 10 years they do, God forbid, have an accident, okay? Is Wolf going to be liable to pay for all those damages that incurs, and if lives are lost and, buildings destroyed, who knows, Have they addressed that issue yet or not, or do we know anything about that, about the liability issues of all of this? Or even
not
paying,
been-
paying the, the cleanup mess too.
It's not been in depth, and what we know is that in Satarsha, where they had the rupture, the Denbury pipeline has actually been, about 3 years later, people were having health issues and were suing the company for payment of medical bills, and Denbury has now been purchased by ExxonMobil, is my understanding. So
But who knows if it's a wash or if Exxon's even
you have no
paying out
idea
on
what's
that.
going to
Right.
happen.
No, well, you've got two situations here. The pipeline's owned by the company, but if you're the landowner and you have leased it, what's your liability going to be?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
If you don't lease it, let's say you sell them the property, yes, that should take liability off of you, because they would become the owner of the property.
Correct.
But at that point then, well, and we'll go to eminent domain. Under Illinois, if you do eminent domain, that technically becomes accessible to the public. So your landowner, they take a 200-foot swath through the middle of your 80 acres. And now the public can go in and walk, drive, ride, whatever on that swath of ground. So if they get off of it, you become liable if there's an accident. If they stay on it, the company becomes liable. So you've got different liabilities here that could be economically, for if somebody that leased it, could be horrific. I mean,
Right.
you could lose everything you've got, not by your fault.
And you need to check with your insurance company. And that's what people have been advised to do. It's my understanding, I've seen a letter that someone asked State Farm, would you still give me liability insurance? And State Farm said no.
Right.
We asked our agent if our insurance would cover us. They have verbally said yes. We asked to see it in writing, we've not seen it.
Right.
So,
And which means the cost could be exceedingly high.
Exactly.
What I understand is Navigator was offering in a contract that they would pay for that. They would cover you if you leased it to them. A friend of mine is a landowner, called his attorney in Peoria, who told him, do not lease to him, don't sell to him, and I will negotiate with him if it gets down to it. Specifically because it's going to be like the wind farms. One company puts it in, 5 years later somebody else owns it. Now, do they keep that agreement that was signed first? And how do you prove that they're actually covering you? If they say, we'll pay, don't worry, we've got an insurance policy on you. All right, so they don't pay it, what happens?
Right.
Similar thing with the wind farms and on the decommissioning agreements.
yeah.
I get it. What else do you want our listeners to know? So you said you're going to be putting out a series of educational information videos or whatnot. How does somebody access? Is that going to be on Facebook and we can share that with the public then?
Yeah, right now, the medium we're using to disseminate this information is a Facebook group. So if you want to just go on Facebook and search Logan County Action, it should come up, and you can. The group is private, the account is public. So what we do is we put all of our content in the group, and then we'll share it, and it'll go to the public.
To the public.
So if you don't want to join the group, you can do that.
Sure.
But if you want to have a dialogue in the group, then just join the group. And as long as you're not a commercial account and you live in the U.S.,
Right, right.
you know, we let you join and then
Sure.
and contribute to the correspondence.
We've got a caller. Caller, go ahead.
Oh, yes. If CO2 is an asphyxiant and there are victims after an explosion and a rupture, can you explain how first responders and EMTs would be able to handle that?
Very good question. Thank you for asking that.
And that's what's being asked a lot, even by the local first responders. They would have to go in with air tanks, and the air tanks they currently have aren't big enough. They won't last. I think they're only half-hour tanks. They would need longer-lasting air tanks. The other issue is a combustion engine that needs oxygen will not run in this circumstance, so you would need some kind of an electric vehicle that's going to have enough power to last long enough to get people in and out. You get into a lot of who's going to pay for the equipment. I've read some of the emergency response plans, and some of the emergency response plans have been to notify within a 15-minute time frame, and the company has 24 hours to notify EPA, I think it is, of the, I mean, it's, you know, in 15 minutes you can be dead. In 24 hours, it's like, what's the point?
Right.
I mean, it's not like they've taken it very seriously, or what are we looking at? So there's the EMS community, first responders, have really taken a look after the Satartia incident and said, and I would feel very bad if there was a rupture and having to ask someone to come in and help me to bring them into that situation.
Because, well, in Atlanta, we have our volunteer fire department.
It's right.
You know, McLean has their volunteer fire department. You know, Armington does. You know, these are our first responders. If this does come through, you know, it's like you said, who's going to outfit them?
Well, how are they going to get there?
And how are they going to get there if you don't have an electric vehicle?
Well, so you're 10 miles away.
Right.
You get called. You may get 5 miles, and then you're in the plume.
You're in the plume, yes. Yeah.
And
And I think there's some historical stories of this being the case, right?
from
Right.
Satartia, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say that on our group, I just posted a video a couple days ago, and it covers a introduction to CO2, and on the tail end of that video, there's a snippet from an emergency room doctor out of Sangamon County, and he goes over sort of the effect on the body and these topics about combustion engines. Right now, I don't think there's any emergency teams that have the equipment to go and deal with a situation like this at all, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, the practicality of them being able to put together equipment to deal with this is probably pretty slim, especially in rural Illinois. So,
Right.
Well, and to think, too, if you need to call in a chopper, you know, to life flight somebody out.
Right. It's
I mean, not just one, you have to have several, but still, up there on top of that plume, and you have a helicopter.
And you can't see where the CO2's at.
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
and I think, Susan, you probably know this better than I, but she touched on the purity of the CO2. So as the CO2 becomes contaminated at either the source or wherever, it becomes more and more corrosive,
Yeah.
which degrades the pipeline, right? So I think even engineers would say it's highly critical to have the purity of the CO2 preserved as it's traveling, you know, in some cases hundreds of thousands of miles through this pipeline. And because if it becomes contaminated below, what is the contamination level? Is it? Somebody said 98%, and I've heard 90%. I don't know.
It's supposed to be, for the CO2 for Class 6 well storage, is supposed to be 98% pure or purer
right in a supercritical state.
in a supercritical.
At 20, let's say 2,000 psi, right? And what happens in these pipeline ruptures, the way they've modeled it, and even I think in some of the cases it's actually happened, there's what they call a zipper rupture.
Yeah.
So it's not like a joint breaks apart, right? What happens is because the piping deteriorates, it rips horizontally along the line, the run of the pipe.
It's called a ductal fracture.
Right. Yeah, or a zipper.
It unzips.
Yep. And that way, but what the outcome of that is it's not like it seeps out. Right. That plume is like almost an instantaneous presence. Right. And so people think of a gas leak in their house, right? They smell gas, they put a little soap on there, and they see the bubbles coming out. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a massive rupture, breakdown of the material, and then the volume of that CO2 into the high pressure, talking about miles of pipe. It shows up just as, and then depending on which way the wind's blowing is where the plume falls.
And when that ruptures out, it may be at 88 degrees or a little less in the pipe. When it ruptures and hits the air, it's minus 109. That's why that liquid that's now turned into a gas is white. It's got it. Once it warms up to ambient air temperature, you no longer see it. It's no longer white because it's warmed up. But when it ruptures out, it comes out at minus 109.
Yeah, the physician described the burning that would. It's not just asphyxiate. I say the word.
No, that is
Asphyxiation.
Yeah, there you go. It's the burning too is an issue. So, it's a complex issue with a lot of complex parts, and there's a lot of studies, a lot of white papers out there that.
And I didn't realize it's wanting to go near the Atlanta grade school. I didn't realize
it'll come
close.
Yeah, and see, I feel like the pipeline was routed to avoid certain things. Like they avoided going into McLean County because they didn't want to have to deal with another county. So they kept it this side of McLean County. They kept it far enough away from the town so they didn't really have to notify anyone in the town. So at one point, a lot of people really weren't aware of what was going on that was right next to them that could very much affect them because of this.
Wow. So moving forward, if people, have listened to this, and then we're going to have this on YouTube to replay. So as the days and weeks go on and they see this, how do they get in contact with you to learn more information? I know you said through YouTube, but are we going to have possibly, hopefully, more informational meetings? If people can voice their concerns, and then also educate to our elected officials and say, don't think of the money, think of the safety. If that's what the person wants. After being educated by all of this information, how does one go about doing that? What do you recommend to our listeners?
Well, for our group, I just say contact us on Facebook at this point. That's the easiest way to do that. If you want to join the group, send a private message to Logan County Action account. And myself and some others can reply to that. And then, I don't know, Susan, are there other?
We've got, in the Logan County area, we've got just an email that we use to get information out to people to encourage them. That's how we get meetings together or send information out and maybe what they should be doing. And we, if someone wants to be part of our email message system, we are Stop CO2 Pipeline. Stop CO2 Pipelines, I think it's plural, at gmail.com.
Okay.
Let me check. No, pipeline.
Single.
Stop CO2 Pipeline at gmail.com. And we try, if someone writes into us, we can add them to our list if they want. If they have a question, we can try and answer. We send out emails. We try and send out a couple a week on what they can do by contacting a legislator, anything in particular that happens to be going on that needs their attention. If people are starting to hear things, that's how we share information of what to be aware of. And then I think probably if you want to know more about CO2 and such, there's a good website. The Coalition to Stop CO2 Pipelines has a website, and they worked with the group that was affected by Navigator. And they're also working with those of us with the Wolf Pipeline.
Were they the same group that was at the Farm Progress show? Because I saw a CO2.
Yes,
That's what I thought that was them.
I was there.
Okay.
We were there answering questions.
Yes.
We were, and our big
It was
push-
very informative, I want you to know. So, because we were at the Farm Progress show,
People found that informative, and our big push was to try and get Farm Bureau to, they've always had a policy of no eminent domain for private gain, and what everyone needs to keep in mind is all these companies are private, for-profit companies. You don't have to go along with anything a private, for-profit company wants. So we were trying to get Farm Bureau to back their policy of no eminent domain for private gain.
Well, and too, the station here is an affiliate of Farm Bureau's Farm Week Now, and I do know that they have been reporting nicely, extensively on this, educating the community as well. So, they can also listen in on mornings and then at noon too. So, because they do report about this, not all the time, but when it does something does need to be reported, they do report on that. So,
Right.
Anyway.
And I would point out, too, with Wolf has applied to Navigator about 5.5 months ago to the ICC with their application. And each applicant gets a case manager assigned, and that case manager has recommended that Wolf not be, their application not be granted.
But still, things can happen, though, too.
Well,
right?
that's the case managers, there's a small panel that actually rules on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much to Bobby Jackson, Susan, I appreciate it. George, you guys have been wonderful today. I appreciate you coming up. I call it the Radio Ranch here in rural Logan County. And Lloyd and Jim, thank you very much. And to all of our listeners, thank you for calling in. We appreciate it. Next week, we'll have Viewpoint, Billboard, and Weather Willing.
This live video stream is made possible in part by WLCN's live stream technology sponsor, Me Realty, located at 602 Keokuk Street in Lincoln, and online at merealty.com. The preceding program is a presentation of WLCN 96.3 FM and WLCNonline.com.